Alrighty, I think we have people filing in from the waiting room. So hello everyone, good afternoon and welcome to today's Tech Tuesday. My name is Vanessa, I'm with ITS Communications, and today we have Tim Fung from BioRender who's going to be teaching us more about this amazing tool to help you make professional figures for presentations, publications, anything you might need. We also have Sarah from the library who can answer some questions that you may have about licensing or anything that has to do with BioRender at Weill Cornell Medicine. Before we begin, I just want to say we are recording today's session. So if you do want to go and look back at anything that we discussed, I'll be sending a follow-up email to everybody who registered with a link to that recording, as well as any other links that might come up today. We'll make sure that you get all that to look at after everything's over. If you have any questions during the session, we do have everybody on mute because we are expecting a lot of people to join today's meeting and we don't want any background noises, but feel free at any point to put a question in the chat and we'll get to them throughout the session just to make sure we're answering all of your questions. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Tim. Tim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Vanessa, for the introduction there, and welcome everyone to BioRender 101. So our goal for this session today is for you to get an introduction to the application and get a sense of how you can use it to enhance your ability for science communication to create clear, concise graphics that readily convey your own research. And if you are interested in joining the institutional license at Weill Cornell, you can contact the WCM ServiceNow Service Center for access. And so just one housekeeping item before we jump into things. If you do have any questions today, feel free to just throw them into the chat. Sorry, this is a previous slide that I had where sometimes we have the Q&A enabled, but chat is totally fine. We'll be keeping an eye out on it as well. Bit of a tongue twister there. So if there's anything that you're curious about, you want to see more of, feel free to just drop it there and we'll make sure to dig into it deeper with you. And of course, if you haven't done so already, I do encourage everyone to sign up for an account and follow along. And if you do have an account already, feel free to sign in. And you can kind of play around with some of the tips and tricks that we talk about. And if you have any questions that come up, this is a really great place to get some answers. And so we've been together over the next 40 minutes or so, and I thought it'd be nice to introduce myself and not just be a disembodied voice here. My name's Tim, and I'm a science communication and customer success manager here at BioRender. I'm a scientist by training. I did my undergrad in biochemistry before getting a PhD in pharmacology and therapeutics. And it was really during my time in grad school where I began to realize just how difficult it was to create figures for papers and for lab meetings. I just remember always having to fight with PowerPoint to create my timelines, needing to align all the notches, making sure the labels were aligned properly. And it was a really tedious process. And on one occasion, I even had to splice together some images that I found on Google alongside some pictures that I took on my phone to create this Frankenstein figure for one of my committee meetings. You can probably all imagine exactly what that turned out to look like. And it was a very consistent theme for me. It was always a struggle to create my figures, and the quality that I produced never seemed to be positively correlated to the amount of effort that I had to put in. And that's why I joined BioRender, because I wanted to help scientists avoid the same problems and struggles that I had to go through and show them that there's an easier way to create figures that accurately represent their work. And so here's an agenda of what we're going to cover. So we'll first do a 5-10 minute introduction into who we are as BioRender. And then for the remainder of the session, I'm just going to spend it in the platform itself, showing you how you can create a figure starting from a template. And then we're going to take a step back actually and talk about all of the components that go into creating our figures. So these are predominantly the icons, the brushes. And then we're going to talk about some really easy design tips that you can incorporate into your own work when you are creating figures, whether it's in BioRender or if you're just creating figures in general. We'll also take a quick peek into Poster Builder, and then we'll also end off with some sharing collaboration features that we developed that make it really easy for you to work with your colleagues. And again, at any point, if you do have questions, feel free to just throw them into the chat. All right, so let's get started here with a quick intro to BioRender. BioRender is a graphics making tool, and it started with our co-founder and current CEO, Shizuki. She studied medical illustration at Johns Hopkins University. before going on to become the lead science illustrator for National Geographic, where she held the position for almost a decade, creating figures just like the one that you see on the screen right now. And it was during this time that she got a chance to work with a lot of scientists and journals like Cell Press, Science, Nature. And this is where she realized that many scientists and labs often don't have the budget nor the resources to visually translate their science. And what ends up happening is we use PowerPoints or Illustrator, or if you're super unlucky, maybe you use Paint before at some point. And we struggle with these tools for hours, days, sometimes even weeks trying to articulate our work visually. And this is likely a story that's familiar to many of you. It's definitely familiar to me. And as you can see on the slide here, some of the figures that have been created as a part of this process. And what's really surprising is that all of these figures all show the same thing. They're all antigen presenting cells interacting with T cells. And you'll notice for yourself too that some of those figures are more successful than others at conveying that intended message. And this can have real consequences on things like getting a publication accepted, getting a grant approved, or even just in general being able to accurately communicate your findings. And this discrepancy was that spark that drove the founding of BioRender, because we wanted to standardize these images and make it so everyone can clearly convey their message visually. And here are just some of the common ways that we see BioRender being used. For those of you who are a little bit more experienced in the platform, you probably already know this, but really you can use it to create figures across your entire scientific journey, starting all the way from the ideation and brainstorming phases, all the way up to your publications, to your patents, posters, and hopefully even more in the future. And really our goal is to accelerate the world's ability to learn, discover, and communicate science. And now that you have a bit more of an idea of who we are as BioRender, I'm actually just going to dive into the platform right now and just start showing you how you can create figures. And I'm going to start from the very beginning here. So for those of you who are newer to the platform, it's easier to follow along. Well, when you first sign into BioRender, you're going to land in your gallery page here. This is where you're going to find all of the illustrations you've created before, as well as all of the illustrations that have been shared with you. And so you'll first land here. This is going to be your unsorted area. This is just all the files that don't belong into a folder. But to stay organized, you can actually create folders for yourself down below. You can see I've created some folders here. And so you can create one, and you can start to add illustrations in to be a little bit more organized and actually just keep figures that pertain to the same project together. And so up top, these are all the files and folders that I've created. These are going to be private to only me unless I decide to share it with others. And down below, this is where you're going to find all the files and folders that have been shared with you. And I'll go into that more detail a little bit later in the session. But for now, this is basically where you're going to find every illustration that you have access to. And when you're first starting off creating a new illustration, there's really two main ways that you can go about it. You can either start by building off of a blank canvas, but the much faster way is actually to use one of the many templates that are available within the BioRender library. And so you can see a sample of some of those templates here. And if we hop over to the templates tab, this is where you're going to find all of the templates in our library. You can browse through all of these. And so again, you'll first see all of the templates available, but we also break it down into many different categories as well. So you see, templates for immunology, for example. You can review those. For folks in doing cancer research, you can go into here. And if you don't necessarily see your specific category, what you can also do is search for something a little bit more specific as well. So if you're in microbiology, for example, you can just type that in, and then you can browse through and see what might be available. So you see some icon packs, you see some templates. And so feel free to browse through all of these. And I do encourage you to, because oftentimes you're going to find things that will be very helpful for your work, and you don't have to create it from the very beginning. And when you are browsing through this library, you're going to notice that these templates kind of fall into two groups. You're going to have those like this HIV replication cycle, which will be much more fleshed out. You can see that we have like our virus, we have our proteins, we have the whole pathway that occurs after HIV binds. And so these are great when you are needing to give, let's say, some background information during a talk. Rather than having to, find something on Google or having to create something on your own, you have this ready-made template for you that you can then just use in your presentation. And I'll show you how you can tweak these as well. when we hop into the editor, because all these templates are made up of pieces that are available to you as well. So that means all of these templates that you see here, they're all editable, and they're just really here to serve as a starting point for you. As well, what you'll find is that there are going to be some that will be more generic. So for example, this intestinal epithelium, you'll see that unlike my HIV replication cycle, this is much more generic. We have sort of the context of our we have the context for these. So you can then add in your own scientific message into it, afterwards, without having to worry about making everything look nice. You already have sort of that foundation for you to then build your illustration off of. Andrew, that's a really good question. Is there an internal tracking feature to ensure that these illustrations are up to date? So our team of medical illustrators will periodically prune through to make sure that things are accurate. However, if you do ever find that there is an issue with maybe new findings that refute something that is on the template itself, what I'd recommend is just contacting our customer experience team. So like this help button down below on the bottom right here, and just let them know that, hey, there might be some literature that there might be some literature that will like alter the depiction of the template, and then that way you can help us flag which ones need updating, and we can make sure to get to that. Andrew, I hope that helps with your question there. Awesome. And when you are looking for templates to use, the template library is one way to find them. Alternatively, you can also find it within the library inside the editor itself. So if we go back into the file that I was working on here, we'll just need to click on it, and this will load up in the editor. And to find templates in the editor, go over to the left-hand panel. We have a templates tab, and this will show you all the same categories that you saw earlier. So feel free to browse through these again, or alternatively, you can search for something as well. So let's say that you are working on creating a visual protocol, just showing how you do mass spec in the lab. What we can do is type in mass spec and then review all of the available templates to us. And so if this one looks pretty good, it's 80% of the way there, what we can do is just select it. Here in this pop-up, you can review a description of what this template is depicting. Underneath, we'll show you the resources and references that we use to ensure that this template is scientifically accurate. And then when you're ready, you think that this is a template that you want to use, either choose to add it to your illustration or replace the entire illustration altogether. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And you'll see that my cover slide will then be replaced by my template. And like I mentioned, these templates are made up of all pieces that you can work with as well. So if I drag a box over everything, you can actually see all the different parts that went into creating this figure. You see that we have text boxes, we have icons, we have arrows. All of these are completely editable. So if I needed to make a tweak to my title here, like protocol, I could do that. I can change the size of this text box, move it around. And even with like the icons that are already on my screen, what I can do is start to remove them if I have to as well. So if in my lab, maybe I don't normally use brain tissue in my experiments, I use liver, I can click that brain slice, delete it, and then I can look for a liver icon to use. And all I need to do is just drag it out of the library and onto my canvas here to start using. And then I can use those guidelines to help me make sure that everything is lined up properly. So it makes it look nice and clean. And even with elements that are already here, I can move things around if I wanted to. I can change the color. I can do a lot of things. Again, these templates are just here to give you that starting point for you to build your illustration off of. So think of it as like a way to like jumpstart that figure making process. And I know for a lot of us, we're going to want to bring our own data into our figures as well, whether you're preparing for a lab meeting or you need to, create like a multi-panel figure. What you can do is upload data into BioRender as well. So you see we have some dummy data here, but to bring in your own data, export it as an image from whichever tool that you're using. So if you're in GraphPad, after you've created your graph, you can upload it as an image and then upload it into your BioRender library. And so here, I do have some GraphPad figure that I've created. So you can see that's in my library here, and I just need to bring it out onto my canvas to start using. I'm going to go ahead and delete this dummy data here, and I can grab this and then replace that generic bar chart with my own data here. And so this is a really easy way to sort of pair the illustrations that you've created in BioRender alongside the data that you gather in the lab. And so this becomes like sort of that one-stop shop for you as you prepare for meetings, for presentations. BioRender isn't just for creating, like that finalized figure that you need. You can also use it for like more of those like day-to-day activities like presenting to your lab. So this is a really cool way to kind of pair that together. And again, like it's not just with the GraphPad images. If you have like microscopy images that you generated, for example, or any IF plots, you can grab all of those and include them in your illustration as well. And like I mentioned, the templates are a great way to kind of provide that background information for your talk as well. So I'm just going to show an example here. Let's say that we are presenting to a group about the IMD pathway, and we want to show some of our work that we've done. What we can do is just look for maybe an existing pathway to help give our readers like that context. So we're going to grab this one here. Again, just replace my illustration. And so the really cool thing is we're going to leverage like the fact that all of this is made within BioRender. So previously, if you were in Google, you had to creatively crop things, maybe put some black censor bars on your image, or you're telling your audience that, hey, ignore the stuff down here. Let's focus up here instead. But what we can do if there are things that we don't want our reader to see, we can actually remove all of that extraneous information. For example, let's say that for me, I only want to show steps 1 to 6 in my talk today. I don't want my audience to focus on step 7 at all. So what I can do, I'm just going to lock the bottom here to help with this, but I'm just going to drag a box over everything that I don't want. And then what I can do is just start removing it from my illustration. And this way, everything else is still in a very clean style. And I can even move in my title here to remove some of this excess white space. And I'll adjust the size of my canvas as well. So anything that falls outside of my canvas will be automatically removed from my final illustration. So I can do that to like kind of trim things away. And if I go to present now, you'll see that we're only focusing on step 1 to 6, and the overall illustration will make it look quite a bit, it'll look more cohesive, and you're only showing the information that you want your audience to see without bombarding them with a lot of excessive things that might occur if you are just like taking an illustration from Google or from like another work. And now that we talked about how we can get jump started creating our figures, I actually want to take a step back here and then talk about all of the pieces that go into creating these figures. So predominantly the building blocks that you're going to work with are the icons and the brushes. I'm going to dive into this a little bit to kind of talk about the characteristics and what makes them different from each other. So first up are the icons. And so you'll see here that the icons are split up into 2 groups. And you'll also find all of the icons in this icons tab. Inside, you'll see that we have major categories of icons that we can work with. We'll have cell types, we have macromolecules, objects in the lab. If you click into any one of these, you'll see that we further divide them into individual subcategories, so you can get really specific with what you're looking for. And so you can dive through, kind of browse what's available. If you have any suggestions on how we can continue to grow our icon library, same with the templates, feel free to drop a suggestion as well. And so this will help give our creative team ideas of popular areas of research that are coming up, and we'll make sure that the library begins to get fleshed out in that direction as well. And as you're browsing through, you'll notice that, like I said, they fall into 2 groups. You'll have some icons that are just the standard thumbnail, and you'll have others that have a symbol on the bottom left as well, along with a purple box that surrounds it when you hover over it. And in this case, this denotes the regular icon as well as the grouped icon. And we're going to talk about these differences here, and I have a really fun example to show everyone. So I'm going to search for a car first, and you'll see that we have a regular version of it. So I'm just going to bring it out onto my canvas. The regular icons are considered the most basic. You can do things like change the sizing, you can change its orientation. If we click on the icon as well, we have an entire editing panel that you can work with, whether it's changing the overall style or color of my icon like so. You can see that we have some presets that you can work with. Or you can overlay your icon as well with a certain color. Think of it as like a piece of colored cellophane that you would just be placing on top of it. So my entire icon will be overlaid by that color. And down below, we also have some properties that you can work with, such as the transparency, the saturation of my colors, as well as the glow of the icon as well. And I really like the glow because it creates like the sense of fluorescence if you're working with like fluorescent proteins like GFP, or if you're working with inflammation, having like a red glow gives you that sensation that something is like red, inflamed. It's a cool way to kind of add more layers to your illustration without necessarily changing the composition of your image. And if you ever do think of like different ways that you can use these effects, let me know. I'm always curious to see because I don't know, I find those really cool for like adding to your illustration. All right. And so after the regular icon, if you were following along closely, you'll notice that we also had a grouped version of the car as well. And I'm just going to bring this also out onto my canvas here. Now, like the name suggests, grouped icons are actually made up of individual pieces that were then tied together. So whereas this regular icon, this was essentially a single unit. Everything kind of moved together. We are able to manipulate it as a whole, but we can't get much more detailed than that. But with the grouped icons, we can actually double click into this and you'll see that all the pieces that went into creating this icon here, and I can start to manipulate those individually. So if I made a mutation to a certain domain, I can flag that visually. If I deleted things, I could do that. I can even move things around here if I wanted to. So this is obviously a little bit nonsensical, but bear with me. But once you finish moving things around, the grouped icons the way that you want it to look, you can still click out of it. And here you'll see that this is a one piece that will move around with you as well. So you can really start to customize and personalize these grouped icons to show exactly what you want it to show. And with the grouped icons, you're not just limited to what's available within BioRender. If you wanted to, you can also create your own illustrations as you can also, create your own grouped icons as well. For example, if you implanted a tumor into a mouse and you want to show that visually, what we can do is go up here, search for a mouse icon, bring that out onto my canvas here. We can grab a tumor. Same thing, just pop it out, pop it onto my mouse like so, make it a little bit smaller. And then what I can do is just drag a box over. I'm just gonna lock this first, but once we do, we just drag a box over both of those pieces, go up back top to here to this menu, to group, hit group, and now we've created our own grouped icon, and you can see that both the mouse and the tumor move together. So now you can expand beyond what's available in the library and start like creating your own entities as well. And if this is something that you know your lab will find helpful for their work, what you can do is add it to your favorites. And then you can even share it with them as well. So you can see that now it's added to my favorites. I don't need to recreate it if I need it for my next illustration. I just grab it from my library, pop it onto my illustration like so. And we can also share it with our lab members. So I'm going to go to share with my lab. And now everyone that's a part of my lab will also have access to this mouse icon. And effectively what you're doing here is starting to create like this shared visual language so that everyone is communicating using the exact same language. And it's really helpful to help facilitate discussions and minimize the chances of miscommunication, because when you start discussing certain concepts, everyone has like that same image or that same visual in their mind, and it really helps to get everyone onto the same page. So using the favorites and sharing, very cool way to get everyone in your lab aligned. And then after the icons, the next set of building blocks you'll most likely encounter are the brushes. And so this is a fun example here. We have some regular grouped icons on my left, as well as a brush on the right. And so let's say with my regular icon, if I wanted to make this longer, for example, I can grab the ends and just pull it on, but you see that it gets a little bit skewed. Or if I do want to add more units, what I have to do is make duplicates of this and kind of stack them end to end with each other. And that's a really tedious process as well. And it really only allows me to create a straight line. But with a brush, if I needed to make this longer, I can just click on the brush and you'll see that there's this blue line and these nodes that are scattered throughout. And this allows me to start manipulating this brush here. So if I needed to make it longer, rather than needing to put in each individual unit, I can just grab the ends of that brush and pull it along. And you'll see that automatically those units are added in for me. And I can even start to bend this brush as well by grabbing the nodes in the middle and then bending that shape of the line. And this will allow me to create some really funky structures, like very custom structures for my work. And so you can start to depict some really cool ideas on your illustrations as well. And also, like, whenever you see this blue line, regardless if it's a brush or it's arrow, it's a line, whatever it is, anytime you see the line and those nodes, this means that the structure is editable and you can start to create some pretty customized shapes for that block. So feel free to play around with it. A lot of really cool things that you can do to sort of like enhance your illustration. And because all of the brushes are actually made up of individual units, we can even turn them into grouped icons as well. And so here you'll see just a quick visual showing that, like, hey, we can go from a brush over to a grouped icon, but we aren't able to go back. And so I'm going to highlight what I mean by this here. So with my brush, I'm just going to make some changes here. Or if you ever needed to like swap and find the brushes, find something else, go over to the brushes tab on the left. We can play around with it to see what might be useful. There's like phospholipids, bilayers, there's like vesicle membranes, nucleic acids, like the one that we're working with earlier. You also see this cell type cell brush as well. So you can browse through all of these to see what might be useful. I'm just going to use this one here because it creates a pretty striking visual. But let's say we start off with our brush, we created those inflection points. And let's say that we actually want to show our audience that, hey, there's a certain portion of my membrane that's damaged and I want them to see that. What I can do is click on the brush, and here in the editing panel, I have the option of separating the brush into editable icons. And when I click that, there will be just a warning reiterating what I just said to everyone. This is going to be a one-way street. So if you need to save it, add it to your favorites before you hit confirm. And once you do, you'll notice that we lost that blue line that runs through it like we have on the right-hand side. But now we have the option of editing the group, which means we can click in and start to select each of these pieces individually. We can drag a box over everything, make it maybe a bit darker, like so. Or if there's like parts that are missing, there's perforations in my cell layer, I can remove that as well. And now this allows you that flexibility of like kind of changing the individual components of that brush as well to help draw your reader's attention to a specific portion of your brush, highlight visually that something is important going on here. And that brush, just by changing the colors and by going into like changing those units, you can create that visually. And of course, as you start to put everything together, you can create some pretty fancy things as well. So again, like this is one of the templates that we're working with. One of the templates that are available. So you'll see that again, all of these pieces are actually made up of the building blocks that we were just talking about. And so again, all of these are editable. And what we tried to do in BioRender is make it so, you know, the only limit to what you can create with your illustrations is what you can imagine. All of the building blocks and the functionality are there to help like support the figures that you want to create. And as you get really experienced, you can get to create some super cool illustrations as well. So like if I go into my templates tab, let's say there's a fun one that I like to show people. That's this one here. And so this template was actually, again, made up of things that are available within BioRender. There's like a handful of pieces that we uploaded in ourselves, this drug molecule being one of them that you can see like really small, and also this protein. Those are really the only two things that we uploaded. Everything else are things that you can find within BioRender as well, and they were just like created using the same elements that are available to you. So some really fun things that you can do, and definitely worth exploring more deeply. And on the topic of like this protein as well, like so this specific cell or the specific surface was what we had to bring in. But if you have crystal structures that you're working with, you can actually bring those into BioRender as well using the PDB function on the left-hand side here. And so here you can bring in any sort of PDB files that you have. So whether you're working on your computer, you can do that. But we're also plugged into RCSB's database as well. So if you need something from the literature, just go up to PDB retrieve, and you can just enter the protein ID of what you're looking for. So I'm just going to use the example that was in the toolbar. So 2CRN. load it up, and then we pull that crystal structure from our CSV into the viewer here. And so you can see that we have it in here now. What we can do is start changing the bond types, the surface types. We can start to make this protein look very different. And we can even select portions of it to highlight, like we're doing right now. Double click to just click the same section to remove it. But we can then start to really visualize this protein. Oops, sorry, on a trackpad here. But we can start to really manipulate this protein's view. And once you're all ready to go, save it as a new icon. And you'll have that crystal structure in your library to start using in your work as well. And so we can go ahead and just bring that out onto our canvas to start using. So a lot of, so a really cool way to add like that extra level of detail towards your protein representations. I know that was a lot of information that we've been throwing out here, but are there any questions about anything that you've seen so far? Any thoughts that you want to share? Ooh, Joshua, that's a really cool idea. No, right now, unfortunately, you aren't able to create a spinning 3D video of the protein. It is going to be a static image, but that's a cool idea, and I'm going to bring that back to my team as well to see to let them know that like this is something that that people are asking for. Montanori, can you create folders or tags to organize uploaded data? That's a good question. So right now, that is something we are working on at the moment. What we can do right now is we can filter. We are working to like separate the shared elements. What's cool is that if for the admins on the license, they can actually share assets with everyone. For example, if there are certain logos that you need to use for your work, they can actually share those with you and you'll be able to sort through those. But having the folders and tags for yourself as well would be quite helpful, I agree. Right now, it is just going to be one big folder here. But it is something that I'll take that back to my team as well. And thank you both for the question. And morphing video of a protein as well between two known structures. Oh, that would be fancy. Does it sound like does the group work with a lot of proteins here today? Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, usually the PDB function, I think there's been less feature requests there, but no, these are really cool insights into what might be helpful. Cool. Are there copyright issues for sharing our BioRender designs on Facebook or in clinics for public education purposes? Yeah, so as long as you cite BioRender and you're on BioRender Premium, there's really no restriction as to where you can use your work. What you'll have to do is just cite BioRender somewhere in like that body of work to say like the image was created within BioRender. Like in your methods exam or methods acknowledgements, like just somewhere, that's fine. I think as long as you're using it for nonprofit purposes, there aren't any restrictions. So if you are planning on sharing it on Facebook or in clinics, totally cool. What you can do is just go up to export. And then here, what you want to do is just check the box for a publication license. This will just tie it with this will be tied specifically to the illustration itself, and that way it gives you permissions to use it anywhere that you might want it to. Rama, does that help with your question there? Cool. Awesome. So what I want to do now is just talk about some easy design tips to keep in mind when you're creating your figures. And we're going to do it just in the context of creating our own figure right now. So it's 8 minutes that we have left. So we're going to go through this pretty quickly, and you can kind of see how fast you can create illustrations within BioRender as well. So the 4 tips that I have for everyone is to consider alignment, scaling, consistent lines and arrows, and then having layout consistent margins across your page. And we're going to talk about these as we create our illustration here of, let's just say, a macrophage activating a T cell. So what I'm going to do is just start looking for my pieces. And really, like those tips, what they're here for is to help keep your audience like focused on the things that you want them to be focused on. So for example, like when your alignment is off, people are going to have like some interesting questions, or like they'll be kind of focused on like the weird alignment as opposed to like the message that you're trying to send. And when you are often presenting to people that are like just doing far too much in far too little time, you want to make sure that when you have their attention, that they're focused on the right things. And so one of the key things is just making sure that things are lined up properly, because it's often a very easy way that people get distracted. So like I showed you with the cell, if it's sitting off from each other, or even with like the membranes as well, if it's a little bit off, you'll kind of notice it. And now the audience is wondering why it's not lined up properly. And all of a sudden they're not focused on like the message that you're trying to send. So having that alignment is alignment is just like a small thing that you can do to help keep them engaged with your message. And the same goes with scaling as well. So with like the receptors that we're working on here, it's not as bad. It's not going to be as bad if I, let's say, drag the edges and made it longer, for example. It's going to look a little bit skewed, but not the worst. However, if you have things that have more like, let's say, anatomical specifications, or there's like very clear dimensions for, let's say, like for the heart. If I did the same thing as I did with my receptor to stretch it out, I did it to the heart here, it's going to look super weird. Like the heart's going to look elongated, it's going to look skewed. And then again, what happens is that people get distracted. I was in a presentation once where someone did exactly this. All I could focus on was like I was wondering why the heart looked like that. And then they were talking about other things. It was like a very important message still, but like my focus got diverted away from it. And what you can do then to help like avoid that, make sure that you're always grabbing like the corners so that both the height and the width scale accordingly. And if you have to, lock the aspect ratio as well. That way, both your height and the width scale at the same rate. And so this will always make sure that your icons are proportional to what's to itself, essentially. And yeah, like a lot of figure creation is really just about making sure that the message that you're creating is very easy for your reader to absorb. And some of these tips that I'm sharing here will kind of help with that process as well. I'm just going to add this into the middle here. And lastly, like maybe in my image, I want to show that like my macrophage is releasing some T cells or releasing some signaling molecules over. So I'll just grab this spray of spheres to represent that. Again, just like making sure that things are aligned properly. And then the next tip that I have is for arrows. And so arrows do a lot of like the heavy lifting within science, right? They're used to show movement, used to show progression. We use it to label a lot of different things. So what I'd recommend for everyone here is that when you are using arrows in your work, make sure that they're consistent. And what I mean by that is if you have an arrow that shows movement, for example, and you have one that has a line fade to it, what you want is to have all of the movement arrows do the same thing. So it's going to drag this and make a duplicate of it here. So in this example, let's say that I have it going the other way as well. What I don't want is having this arrow just be a solid line. And the reason for that is now it confuses the reader a bit. We don't know if this arrow represents the same idea as this arrow. And this is something that you want to make sure that it's very clear. If one movement arrow is faded, all of them should be faded as well. Same with like the lines that you label with. They should all have a very consistent look. And so that way, like the same sort of like concepts that you want to depict are represented the same way. And it just helps with like the interpretation of your illustration. I'm going to delete this here. And in terms of this illustration, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to grab a zoom lens to kind of act as a magnifying glass to kind of connect like these two sides together. It's a little bit messy right now, but I'm just going to grab this, pop it into the middle, and then just make this nice and big. It's going to center it here like so. And then what I'm going to do is just grab the tails of my line and just put it into position. And then using the crop tool, I'm just going to clean up my illustration a little bit. So I'm just going to trim away everything that falls into my zoom lens. And I'm going to repeat the same thing with everything that falls outside of it like as well. So I'm going to do the same thing here, add a circle crop, and then just move it into position. Now, everything that falls outside of my crop, will be trimmed away. And all of a sudden you'll see we're able, oops, I'm going to edit that crop a little bit here. We see a little bit that still peeks through. So I'm going to trim that all, and you'll see that we have a nice clean illustration afterwards. And then lastly, what we want to do is just make sure that everything is aligned up properly in terms of margins. So I'm going to overlay my entire canvas with the grid. And what I mean by margins is to have like the edges of your canvas, like the distance from the edge of your canvas to the edge of your icon, to be consistent throughout your page. And to do that, I can just go to canvas size and then adjust this a little bit here. Let's make it all like about 2 units worth of distance. And again, this helps to just clean up and make your illustration look very professional. Very easy things that you can do to like just level up, instantly level up your figure. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And just by doing that, you can see that, you know, it helps make our illustration just look higher quality, because it's like paying attention to those little details that like take it a long way. And so hopefully everyone gets like some ideas on like where they can apply those tips to their own figure making process, whether it's in BioRender or elsewhere. This is a really cool way, just some simple things that you can do to like take those to the next level. And I know we're running a little bit short on time here. What I'm going to quickly do is just show you where you can find Poster Builder, and I'll show you where we can find figures as well. So Poster Builder is pretty involved. If there is a lot of interest in Poster Builder itself, let us know in the chat. We can look for another Tech Tuesday that we could potentially slot ourselves into. Vanessa might be taking a little bit too much liberty here. Let me know if this is
it's fine. Please feel free to go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, just let us know if we want to, if there is interest in it, we can walk through it in more detail. But if you are working on your posters, just click on Poster Builder on in the dropdown, and those will take you almost to like a separate portion of the platform where you can then build your poster within BioRender, and it has like all the same sort of editing and functionality as like the editor as well. So feel free to kind of play around with that. And lastly, to kind of wrap up, I want to talk about the share and collaboration. Oftentimes, like we'll need to work with our collaborators and colleagues. So if you do need to give access to your lab mates or whoever else, go up to share. And then you can just enter in the emails of the people that you want to share with. If you're an admin, you can also invite if you're part of a lab, you can also invite them as well. And then once you do, they'll have access to this specific illustration, so that when you need to go make changes or modify the image in any way, everyone's actually working on the same file. Just can think of it as like the Google Docs of figure making. So rather than having to send multiple copies back and forth to each other, my lab was terrible at that. We would have one email that goes out to like 3 different people. Everyone would be making their own changes. There's scattered across all different copies. And then the poor grad student usually had to consolidate all of that together into the final image. That's a lot of work that needs to go in. It's a lot of spot the difference to see like what's different between the different copies. So instead now in BioRender, you can actually all work on the same illustration. You can even add comments for each other as well to like leave feedback. So let's say, please change the title. I can post that in my image here, and whoever has access to it can also see that comment. We can have that discussion thread. Really, it's just here to make it so you can you don't have to go to multiple different places to find everything that you need. Everything is just going to be housed under one roof. Awesome. And that's pretty much it for what I wanted to go over with everyone today. So as we wrap up here, I just wanted to give a special thanks to Sarah, Vanessa, and Kristen for organizing the session and for getting the word out to everyone. And I just wanted to thank all of you for taking the time to join me. And for your great questions in the chat. I see, and thanks Sarah for fielding a lot of those as well. And yeah, like hopefully you picked up some ideas on how to use BioRender. You saw how it can you can see how it fits into your own workflows. We'd love to hear your experience as well. If like you have any thoughts about the platform, if there are features that you think will be helpful, we'd love to hear all of your ideas. So feel free to contact either myself at tim@biorender.com, or you can reach out to our support team as well through the in-app chat here. to get in touch with them. If we'd love to hear anything that you want to share with us. I'm happy to stick around for a couple minutes if anyone has any last questions, but if not, thank you again for coming today, and happy illustrating, everyone.
Thank you so much, Tim. We did have one question about the
Hmm.
poster builder. Somebody asked, can we change the size of the poster within Poster Builder?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And yes, I know exactly what you're talking about when you're creating PowerPoint posters, that like changing the dimensions were just absolutely terrible experience. So what you can do if you're in Poster Builder, just go up to poster settings, and here you can actually change the dimensions of your poster. And the really cool thing here is that everything will scale with you. So let's go 42 by 34, let's say, or 30. You'll see that all the sections in between will automatically rescale, and it's same with the section within as well. So if you if one section starts to interfere with another, all of this will automatically adapt with you, so you don't have to worry about needing to manually adjust everything.
And someone said, and you simply import text from a Word document, or how would it work?
Exactly. So we have like different section blocks. So we have these essentially like text blocks that we can use. I'm just going to quickly refresh my page here. But essentially what you're doing is giving yourself space where you can put in your text. So like this text box, for example, we just drag it out. And then once we have it here, I do have a little bit of text that I prepared earlier. So what we can do is actually just copy and paste that in. So I have my Word doc, copy my text, and then just dump it into my abstract here like so.
Awesome.
Awesome.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
So if somebody obtains a license to use BioRender, and obviously we've recorded this and we'll be sending it to everybody so they can go back and refer to it. But is there like a knowledge base of some kind on the BioRender site that people can reference if they're trying to figure out how to do something within the tool?
Yes, and thanks, Vanessa, for setting me up for this one.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah, to get to there, it's just learn.biorender.com. And then here is a sort of our knowledge base. You'll see some videos for where about like the different features individually, give you some ideas on how it can fit into the illustration that you're creating. So there's a lot of bite-sized clips here, along with some larger things as well, like some larger full tutorials. So you'll have all of that. And then also we have our FAQ, sorry, where again, you can find articles regarding like different ways to use a feature, as well as if you have any questions about BioRender, feel free to like browse through like these help articles as well.
Awesome. I think we answered everyone's questions. Oh wait, someone just mentioned, can we create 2D patterns like 1D patterns using the brush?
Yeah, so it's gonna, I think, do you mean 3D versus 2D?
I was gonna say, I think it meant,
Yeah.
I think it's 3D, sorry.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a typo, but
Yeah.
go ahead.
So it would be 2D. We don't support 3D applications right now. But if you are looking to create almost like a 3D effect, you can use like skewing and changing the perspective to give it that sense of depth. It would be a bit more of a manual process. Right now, the brushes would be focused on more of a 2D pattern.
Perfect. I'm going to just point out in the chat that Sarah has mentioned that if you do have questions about licensing, you can contact SciSoft at med.cornell.edu. Tim also provided his information. So what I'm going to do after the session is over is just compile all, the links that Tim mentioned, the contact information and the video. I'll send it to everybody who registered so that you can go back and take a look at everything. And if you've got any questions, you can reach out. But it looks like we've answered all the questions. Tim, again, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a really cool application to present. And also thank you to Sarah for answering all of these questions in the chat. And thank you to everyone else who joined us to learn a little bit more about BioRender today. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.